Good evening, ghouls and fiends. Welcome once again to another edition of the Ministry of Horror. I'm your host, Tezz, as per usual, coming to you on a Thursday evening here in the UK on twitch.tv/Tezzius, Tezzius. We're doing a Thursday stream, Thursday live show, because I'm visiting family. Well, family friends tomorrow. I won't be back home in time to stream at the usual allotted time, so I figured, hey, let's go ahead, let's do a Thursday show. We've got a lot to talk about. We are going to aim to do a watch party. Depending on how long the main show goes, we may get to the post-show portion where we would do the watch party and decide, you know what, it's a work night, maybe not, maybe we'll leave it. Who knows? I likely won't be doing anything at the weekend because it's just going to be a lot of work, work to do. But looking at the chat, we have the man, the myth, the legend himself, the Gruff. The Gruff is in the chat. Good evening, long time no chat. How's it going, dude? I hope you are doing well, and welcome back to the chat, my friend. It's been an action-packed time since we did the last show. We're going to talk about some news. And it's going to lead into a bit of an announcement for next week. So, following on from the information we had last time we did the show, where I was fortunate enough to get sent a early home media release link of Dr. Jekyll, the latest Hammer release starring Eddie Izzard. And that was real nice to receive. Very unexpected. Very cool. Really put a smile on my face. We've got another person in the chat. Eddie the Beast is here. Eddie, how's it going? Eddie says, hello Tezz, I'll probably only be making it to the watch party, just stopping by to say hi also to Gruff as well. No worries, Eddie, I hope you're well. We will no doubt see you later on during the watch party. Hope you are doing good. Thank you very much also to the Gruff. The Gruff is subscribed via Prime. Always appreciate that. We normally have a little sound bite. It's very hit and miss as to whether that wants to work. So let's go ahead and we'll play this one.
You hang up on me again, I'll cut you like a fish, understand?
Not really appropriate, but there we'll go. We'll that's the first one I clicked, and I can't really see the titles.
This is God.
There you go. This is God. So, yes, as mentioned, we got this. We got this link. We got an email. Very nice to receive that. Now, I then received another email last week about an opportunity to be selected to go to an advanced screening of a new horror which is making a lot of waves at the moment, and it's one that I saw the trailer for about a month or so back and thought, oh, that looks really cool. I'm going to have to keep an eye for when that comes out. And that's called Late Night with the Devil, starring David Dastmalchian, who's been in a ton of things. So it's really going to be cool to see him as a leading man. He's most recently been in Dune. I don't know about Dune Part 2. I haven't seen it. I can't remember what happened to his character in Dune Part 1. I was kind of let down by Dune because I like the director. I don't really know a lot about the property. Dune Part 1 didn't really do it for me, so I've not really been in a rush to go out and see Dune Part 2, just, full disclosure. So we're getting ad notifications. Oh well, can't do anything about them. See you all later, Eddie. See you later on. So it's going to be cool to see David Dastmalchian in a leading role for the first time that I'm aware of. And I declared the interest. I said, oh yeah, of course, I'd love to see the film like a week early. Could I also have a ticket for my girlfriend? And yeah, they came back. The company came back and said, yeah, sure, here's the address, here's the time. We'll have some tickets set aside for you. Like, it's really cool. It's really cool. I can only assume my email just got passed along via there is someone in the Discord I know who has those connections, so I'm very thankful to them, because that's the only thing that I can assume. And very excited. So with that in mind, obviously this week's a Ministry of Horror week. I didn't want to then leave it too long after watching the film to chat about it. So I'm planning on... Sorry, I just noticed on the screen it said that there's an ad break happening, so hopefully it's not been missed much. But yeah, I'm watching it next Monday. So rather than leaving it a week before doing another show and then discussing it like a week later, I'm kind of thinking I may vlog part of the journey, but for socials, I don't know. I don't really do much on socials. Like the Ministry of Horror social, I'm very bad at posting anything to it, which is, I need to get better at that. But it's just, that's, you know, my socials are mainly dogs and gym, and that's about it. But I may vlog it, and if I do, then I may just kind of cut that together for a little kind of video for like out the screening thoughts, you know, for the show. But I'm going to do a show next week. So for the first time in well over a year, to my knowledge, there'll be weekly editions of the Ministry of Horror. That's not to say that's going to be permanent going forward. I think my girlfriend would probably kill me if I spent every Thursday or Friday night or whatever streaming for hours on end. She wouldn't. She'd be very supportive. She's a big fan. But you know what I mean in terms of just, it's, you know, you got to balance... You've got to balance work life and all that and socialness. We've also got Fran McCann's in the chat. Hey, Fran, I hope you're doing well. Fran says, has anyone else seen the Crow trailer? Ugh. I have got that noted down on my news because I did actually manage to watch some trailers before going live. I'm making a bit of a habit of actually doing some preparation. You know, it's almost like I'm starting to actually do some preparation for the show. I've only been doing it for like a while, year and a half, 2 years, whatever it is. 2 years now, yeah, shit. Well over 2 years, fuck. But anyway, I digress. Yes, that's the main kind of talking point for me, is that next week, seeing A Late Night with the Devil, and going to do another Ministry of Horror next week. We got a few things to chat about. Now, we've only got the one review for later on. I was tempted to do a retro review, but I figured we did a whole show on this particular franchise. So from chatting in the Discord, I did a bit of an impulse purchase. I chatted to Matt Wyatt, who had picked up the 4K edition of I think it's called the Quartet of Torment, the Hellraiser collection. And I was like, oh, that is a nice box set. And he'd mentioned it's kind of out of print now because it's a limited run. And I'd thought about it, but then I'm not a massive Hellraiser fan, but I thought that's a nice collection. It's an Arrow release, and Arrow always do really good releases. Well, I purchased it, not the 4K version, because that is incredibly expensive. But I figured I should go for it, because I remember when the Texas Chainsaw Massacre special edition was released, nice little box set of just the film, the first film. And I didn't go for it because I was like, I own a copy of it, you know, whatever. But it's such a nice looking release that when I have then gone to look to purchase it, I think you can still buy it at a decent-ish price directly from Arrow, but places like Amazon, it was ridiculously overpriced. It had gone, the resale, or the whatever price of it had shot up massively. So I did pick that up, and I watched Hellraiser 1, Uno, last week, or early this week. It all blends into one. I think it was early this week. And anyway, I hadn't really watched the first film in quite a long time. I'd always kind of just assumed, first films are fine. You know, the main thing is Frank coming out of the floorboards as that weird kind of goblin-y thing, and then, you know, the finale with Jesus Wept and Pinhead and all that. And I'd always kind of assumed, the second one's my favourite. But the Hellraiser series, and I'm going to say series, really just the first four, the Hellraiser Quartet is an odd one, because when I first saw them, I didn't really think much of 4. I've only seen it the once. Part of the reason I got the box set was because I was interested to watch it again. When I did the Hellraiser show in the initial run of Ministry of Horror with a guest who went nuclear in the Discord. I don't know why. Still to this day. Not a good look. The fourth one was one of the ones that I hadn't been able to rewatch or have a first time watch. And I think one of the I think there was about 2 of the later sequels that I just hadn't got time to watching, and I still haven't. But when you see some of the later Hellraiser films, you kind of just think, I don't really want to put myself through that because some of them are fucking terrible. And anyway, when I'd first seen the 4th one many years ago, I thought, no, don't think much of it. I always assumed the second one was my favourite. And anyway, the 3rd film, whenever I first saw that, I remember thinking, oh God, it's kind of like, you know, the first 2 had this kind of independent Britishness about them, kind of a bit higher quality, and the 3rd one felt a bit kind of like, oh, Hellraiser's gone Hollywood. But when I've seen it subsequently, I'm like, it's actually quite fun. And I know that's weird to talk about Hellraiser, because Hellraiser is... I kind of liken Hellraiser to kind of mainstream extreme gore. Now, you could always say that films from similar time periods or earlier were a lot gorier. Of course they were. You know, I'm not saying they're the goriest films. But in terms of the films that have that mainstream exposure, like everyone knows who Pinhead is, they're pretty grisly and violent. Like the first 2, well, the first 3 especially. Again, I can't remember too much about 4. Do need to rewatch it. But the 3rd one, I'd reevaluate it. Anyway, the long and short of this is, I'd always assumed the second was my favourite. But rewatching the first one recently, there's quite a lot of it that I do not remember. And quite a lot of it is pretty good. I mean, it is pretty gnarly, I will just say that. But it's if you haven't seen the original Hellraiser for a long time because you thought, oh, yeah, it's all right, but the later ones were better, or it's not really for me, maybe give it a rewatch. Because I was a lot more engaged than I thought I would be. I kind of just thought I'll give it a watch, see what the 4K scan on the Blu-ray, because it's not the 4K edition, it's the Blu-rays. See how that looks. But there's a lot I'd completely forgotten, or at first I was thinking of these additional scenes added in, but not really, no. And some comments in the chat. Yeah. Entertaining episode, and the guest sure was something, is all I'll say. Yeah, it's... I was going to include that, but I figured, no, you know... You can hear my initial thoughts on the Hellraiser series back in that episode, if you so wish, because it was a fun episode to do. Just a shame that the guests did whatever they did in the Ministry of Slam Discord later on. But yeah, my reevaluated opinion would probably raise that from an initial viewing of I don't know, maybe a 7, 6.5 for the first film, 7, to probably closer to an 8. Well, probably a solid 8, I think, really, actually. It's pretty good. Actually, I think it's... Yeah, wasn't expecting my opinion to change that much. But, flipping out, I can ramble. The one review we will have later on is the new Blumhouse release, Imaginary. We're going to be talking about that. We are then going to have a look at the Blumhouse Productions, because these days, when it comes to new horror releases, new cinematic releases of horror, you can generally assume it's either going to be Blumhouse, or if it's more, let's say, highbrow, or assumption of highbrow, A24. They're the general big hitters these days. You know, you've still got the odd Miramax, I believe, Spyglass, whatever, but more often than not, you watch a new horror that has a big, wide release, it's probably going to be Blumhouse. Does that mean that they're all exceptional? No. Does that mean it's cookie cutter by the numbers? Not necessarily, no. I've handpicked a few entries to just kind of go through the varying levels of their releases. Now, they have released so many horrors over the last 20, 25, 30 years, maybe 25 years probably. I'm not going to touch on all of them. There's plenty that they've done, which we have talked about previously. Paranormal Activity, we talked about not so long ago. The David Gordon Green Halloween sequel series, we've talked about that to death. So we're not going to touch on those. We're going to touch on a couple of the well-known entries. Some you may not be aware were Blumhouse, and some which missteps, in my opinion. Fran the Can says, bring back Dark Castle. Now, I'm going to need to remind myself what films Dark Castle released. Dark Castle Entertainment. I'm assuming this is Dark Castle Entertainment. I normally think of House on Haunted Hill, of course, 13 Ghosts, Ghost Ship, Gothica, House of Wax. I think House of Wax is underrated. I don't understand the hate it got. The Rock and Roller, The Hills Run Red. Oh God, have I seen The Hills Run Red? That's a title I haven't thought about in a very long time. They find themselves being stalked by the film serial killer Babyface and discover a horrifying secret about the film they seek. Wow. That's just given me a weird hit of nostalgia because I completely forgot that film exists. Splice, Bullet to the Head, The Factory, Orphan, First Kill. I wasn't that impressed with Orphan First Kill. The first Orphan film, which they also did, is decent, but First Kill, I didn't really like where that one went, to be honest. Fran, the Gruff says in the chat, I haven't seen the original Hellraiser in over 20 years, to be honest. I should really give it a watch by the sounds of it. Yeah, to be honest, like I say, it's one of those films when I first saw it, I was like, it's pretty grisly, but it's not really sunk its hooks into me, you could say. Whereas the second one I thought was had a bit more to it. A little bit more backstory when it comes to the Cenobites, which I think was quite interesting. And so on and so forth. But no, the first one has a story, a demented love story, of deception and murder. It's pretty good, and hell, you know. It has got some ropey early 80s CGI, but you know, that's only right near the end of the film. You can kind of ignore that, considering the practical effects that are on show. Anyway, it's time for the horror news. This is the news. That's right, this is the horror news, baby. We're going to be taking all our horror news from bloodydisgusting.com. I have earmarked a fair few little bits of horror. We may chop it down a bit. I'm hitting the road tomorrow to visit the family, so I don't actually, me and my girlfriend haven't actually set a time that we're going to be getting up and hitting the road. I don't think it needs to be super early, but obviously we don't want to just leave it too late. So anyway, long and short of it, I don't want the show to run too long, but I say that every time. And I ramble on for most of it, so who knows. All of this horror news comes from bloodydisgusting.com. First up is the 6 new horror movies releasing this week, including stop motion at home. Now, it says 6. I'm going to skip out a few of these. I've watched all of the trailers, so I have opinions on all of these films mentioned on Bloody Disgusting's new films releases list. That being said, a few of them I wouldn't say are really horror adjacent at a push for one of them. I may briefly talk about that. There's a couple that weren't really at all horror. So anyway, let's have a look. So, the past comes to claim its revenge in Screenbox exclusive horror movie Followers, which is now on the Bloody Disgusting powered Screenbox streaming service, which we don't get in the UK. To my knowledge, we still don't. In Followers, a year after surviving a brutal attack, a social media influencer and her friends find themselves once again in the crosshairs of a dangerous and relentless dark web cult, thirsting for retribution and willing to stop at nothing to get it. In this Chattanooga Film Festival original selection, director James Rich and co-writer Zach Hirsch imbue the horror genre with timely social commentary. Gigi James, Revel Carpenter, Molly Leach, Jackson Jones, and Michael Bonini star. So, trailer for this is fairly by the numbers. It had that kind of, I guess, indie feel with the lighting and with some like the camera angles, which isn't really a big deal. Shouldn't really detract much from the film, and I shouldn't really talk about the apparent budget of films as a negative, because that is a little bit unfair. I mean, ultimately, the story and the mise en scène The performances should be the hook, really. And you can find gold in films that were made for shoestrings budgets, But in this day and age of streaming, where films are available at the touch of a button, hundreds of thousands of films, sometimes it does help to kind of be able to gauge what sort of film you're going to get. And this trailer didn't really give me too much. It kind of felt a bit like You're Next, if anyone's ever seen that. It's not jumped onto my list of I should give that a watch. Fran in the chat says, how many social media influencer films do we really need? I feel that will date these movies really quickly. Oh yeah, I agree. I mean, we watched that film, we reviewed that film last year. Was it called Influencer? Or Influencers? It was Influencer. Which for the most part, I thought was pretty by the by, a thriller, not really that engrossing. By the end of it, I quite enjoyed it. I think the finale really saved the film for me. Yeah, that being said, it's a very of the now thing where anyone seemingly can become an influencer. And I mean, Christ, on Instagram Reels, when you scroll through, there's certain things that pop up based on your engagement and whatnot. And I normally just get funny dog videos of people injuring themselves, I don't know what that says, or horror movie type things, or true life horror movie stuff, which is normally all bogus crap. But you do see some funny things, and there's influencers in the wild. The funniest one, I will say, is it's these girls who are sat outside of an arena on the floor filming themselves, and it's at a Taylor Swift concert, and this particular Taylor Swift song comes on, and the girl in the middle bursts out into hysterical crying because the caption is, when you hear Taylor play whatever song it is that literally saved my life, but her friends are trying so hard not to laugh because it is so ridiculous. It's just like, firstly, why would you be sat outside of a gig filming yourself if you maybe couldn't get tickets to the gig? But just that narcissistic sort of tendency. And also you see these influencers in the wild posts where it's people at a concert and they look down with their camera phone, how fucking old am I? They look down with their phone at the concert, which is like Travis Scott or something, and then pan across, and there's a row of these guys who are all filming themselves singing along because they're either live streaming or they're going to do it for the whatever. And it's like when you see like sporting events and people in the crowd are filming their reactions. And I always just think, if you spent that money, why aren't you just enjoying the performance or the event instead of, it's about me, I've got to film myself? I don't know. Like, I think there's a difference between providing interesting content and engagement and people just so vapid and self-absorbed in their own bullshit. Anyway, that's kind of my thought on some degrees of influencers, quote unquote, who all seem to get hundreds of thousands of followers, and you think, why? I don't know. I'm just going off on a rant here. Next up, Gravitas Ventures is back this week with a new movie, The Woods Are Real, from director Alex Lambert, and the film was released onto digital outlets on Tuesday, March 12th. The film is said to put a folk horror twist on the story of Job. Job and Quincy are a privileged, fiercely progressive Brooklyn couple. They buy the right things, donate to the proper foundations, and march for every just cause. But when their friend Caleb returns from a country pilgrimage challenging their bleeding liberal hearts, Quincy is initially skeptical. But when Joba insists they take up an invitation to the same off-grid spot, they are met by a kitschy cabin in the woods peppered with analog devices of a simpler age, a rotary phone, religious iconography, and Edison machine. And when a curiously labelled record plays a menacing message, Joba and Quincy rapidly learn that their bank accounts have been drained, their digital records erased, and their family businesses are collapsing. They try to flee, only to grow more enveloped by the woods. With nothing left but the clothes on their back, the couple find themselves trapped in a spiritual test of survival. There's a lot of people starring this, I'm not reading them all out, but it was directed by Alex Lambert. Now, trailer for this did seem a bit more artsy, a bit more to kind of use the same sort of terminology. Kitsch. Yeah, it looked all right. It looked interesting. Not again. Did anything in that trailer give me enough to get me hyped to watch it? No, not really. The premise sounds interesting, but the execution in the trailer, don't know. The characters didn't come across that likable, and I guess from the description as well, they maybe seem a bit kind of full of themselves or whatnot. And so then, if you then got to root for them, yeah, this next one was more of a drama thriller. This one definitely didn't look like a horror at all. This one definitely was not a horror. So the last film of the new releases, which was now this does look like something to check out. Aisling Françoisi, who did The Nightingale, Last Voyage of the Dementor, or starred in, I should say, stars in stop motion, which opened in select theatres last month. It's coming to VOD at home on March 15th, tomorrow. Directed by Robert Morgan, the film stars Françoisi as Ella Blake, a stop-motion animator who is struggling to control her demons after the loss of her overbearing mother. Suddenly alone in the world, she embarks upon the creation of a macabre new puppet film, which soon becomes the battleground for her sanity. As Ella's mind starts to fracture, the characters in her animated film take on a terrifying life of their own, and the unleashed power of her imagination threatens to destroy her. Robert Morgan and Robin King wrote the screenplay. If any of that sounds interesting to you, check the trailer out. This looked like there's something to it, which sounds a little bit derivative of the other films mentioned, but honestly, when talking about perceptions of films from trailers, this one feels kind of a cut above. I don't know if the director, I wonder if he did censor. There's no mention of it here, but visually it looked quite similar to censor. So let me just do a quick Wikipedia. Robert Morgan, filmmaker, British filmmaker. Did he do censor? No. Fuck. Did ABCs of Death 2, which I haven't seen any of the ABC of Death films. And then stop motion. Basically visually, it looks like a similar tone of color palette, I should say, to Censor. And Censor I did find quite an interesting and a unique watch. I actually quite enjoyed Censor. But this one looks like it could be quite disturbing in places. The crossing the realms of sanity and reality between what is occurring in her film and what's occurring in reality, I should say, do look quite interesting. And the stop motion creations do look like something out of a Tool music video from the mid 90s, something like Sober or Schism. They're creepy. So, that certainly has my attention. I mean, it looks so much more my lane when it comes to use of creepy stop motion than what was that Shudder film that came out last year that I was really quite hyped to watch, but I just struggled so much with it. It's called Mad Gods or Mad God, which was a stop motion, entirely stop motion horror. I couldn't get on with that. I wanted to like it because the concept sounded so unique and interesting, but it tried my patience. I didn't finish it. But anyway, that's the new horror films. Now, as mentioned earlier on in the chat, Fran had asked if anyone else has seen the Crow trailer. Me, I have. So, GamePlayDiscussion.com. The internet sure was riled up by the first images of Bill Skarsgård as Eric Draven in Lionsgate's remake of The Crow a couple of weeks back, with even the original movie's director, Alex Proyas, chiming in and taking a jab at Draven's bad hair day. But it's not fair to judge movies based solely on a couple of random images. That's what official trailers are for. Bill Skarsgård takes on the iconic role of Eric Draven in Lionsgate's new reboot of The Crow. And Lionsgate has unleashed the upcoming movie's full official trailer this morning. The reboot will release in theatres on June 7th. The trailer is available online, which promises a new take on the classic tale that definitely isn't holding back the bloody violence. We've kind of read through, I think, on a previous discussion, the comments there, but I watched the trailer. So first off, I will say going into this, I've never read The Crow. It's based on a novel or a graphic novel. I think it might be a graphic novel, not entirely sure. It's based on a book. I have seen the original, the Jason Lee, the late Jason Lee film. Brandon Lee, not Jason Lee. I'm talking about Brandon Lee. The late Brandon Lee, a few times in the past, and it's like visually iconic, as we discussed. You know, obviously Sting took his image from The Crow based on advice from Scott Hall, to my knowledge. Yeah, iconic, has some good moments, but is it a film that clicked with me? No. I enjoy it when I've seen it, but it's not been like, oh man, that's fucking incredible. It hasn't connected me on the level that I'd have wanted it to. So I never bothered watching the sequels, never saw the TV show. And from what I heard, the sequels were poor. So I don't have much of a close affinity with the character, and I know that they've been trying to do a remake for a long time. A number of different actors connected, number of different versions of the script that have occurred in the past. So when I watched the trailer, probably about 20 minutes before going live, I don't really have much of an opinion, to be honest. I think it looks like it could be quite slick. There's clearly a lot of money behind it. It doesn't look like they're going to pull back on the graphic violence. It looks like Bill Skarsgård will do a good performance. There's the moment when he finds his girlfriend being attacked or murdered, which shouldn't really be much of a spoiler. He's showing pained emotion very well, so I think he will do well. And you know, I think he's a decent actor. I enjoyed him as Pennywise. He's got a good small role in Barbarian. And because I don't have that close affinity to the original, that I don't feel I'm comparing it much to it. I think you can't help but compare the imagery, and yeah, he does look a bit more modern emo with the face tattoos and whatnot, and the short hair. But I guess you have to think when the original came out in, what was it, 1990, 91, 92 at a push, around that sort of time. Probably 93 now that I'm talking about it. You know, the long hair look was certainly more in, I guess. More, you know, grunge was huge. Everyone had long hair, and metal, everyone had long hair. So that look was fitting for the time. Now, I'm not going to say people don't have long hair these days, but I'm just sort of thinking in terms of fitting in with the modern zeitgeist. The long hair to short hair difference doesn't really mean much, you know. I think with the makeup, it is basically just mass eyeliner. As Fran in the chat said, he looks like Jared Leto's Joker and Machine Gun Kelly had a baby. Yeah, it does kind of have that vibe. And I'm not a big fan of Jared Leto's Joker. I don't really like Jared Leto. And Machine Gun Kelly seems like a bit of a clown. So it's not really a good starting point in terms of that. It looks like it could have some fun action in it. And it does look pretty violent. There's shotgun blast to the head. There's stabbing himself or taking the sword through the gut and then pulling it out and shooting through himself to hit someone behind him. Things that probably were done in the original Crow, but done with a bit more visual aplomb with modern technology. I'm very much middle of the road with this. I hadn't watched the trailer thinking, oh yeah, that looks really good. But I certainly didn't think that it looked terrible. Because again, I don't have a closeness enough to the original to compare it. Gruff in the chat says, yeah, seen it, not sure what to think. They kind of picked a good time to release it, though, with everyone Googling and going on YouTube to watch classic Sting clips. Yeah, actually, it's a pretty good idea, yeah. He also says, I haven't even read a comic of The Crow, but I was a massive fan of the movie back in the day. But I do think it feels a little dated nowadays. Yeah, I'm sure a few years ago I watched it kind of thinking, oh, yeah, give The Crow a watch. That's a cool film. And it was fine. It was fine. That's not to be disparaging to anyone that really enjoys The Crow, but it's never had that. It's never had that hit for me that when I put it on, I'm like, yeah, this is really good. Not like, The Matrix. You put that on now, it's like, it's still good. Lord of the Rings, put it on now, still good. Yeah, Halloween, the original, anything, it never clicked with me. But oh well. Next up, Scream 7. Neve Campbell is returning as Sidney Prescott in a new movie from director Kevin Williamson. A huge Scream 7 update has been announced by Neve Campbell this afternoon, with Campbell revealing that she'll be back as Sidney Prescott in the upcoming Spyglass sequel. Additionally, original Scream scribe Kevin Williamson will direct the film. Campbell writes on Instagram, "Hi all, I'm so excited to announce this news. Sidney Prescott is coming back. It's always been such a blast and an honour to get to play Sidney in the Scream movies. My appreciation for these films and for what they have meant for me has never waned. I'm very happy and proud to say I've been asked, in the most respectful way, to bring Sidney back to the screen. I couldn't be more thrilled." Well, actually I could. While I've been so incredibly lucky to make these films with both the master of horror Wes Craven and the wonderfully talented Matt and Tyler team, I've dreamt for many years of how amazing it would be to make one of these movies with Kevin Williamson at the helm. And now it's happening. Kevin Williamson is going to direct Scream 7. This was his baby, and it's his brilliant mind that dreamt up this world. Kevin is not just an inspiration as an artist, but has been a dear friend for many years. To the amazing Scream fans, I hope you're as excited as I am. The upcoming Scream 7, which is currently untitled, was written by Guy Busick from a story by James Vanderbilt and Guy Busick. You can check out Campbell's Instagram update online. The franchise has been mired in controversy in the past several months, with new series leads Melissa Barrera and Jenna Ortega both exiting the project. Barrera was fired, while it was subsequently announced that Ortega wouldn't be returning. In the wake of all that news, director Christopher Landon also departed the project. Neve Campbell famously refused to return for Scream 6 due to a pay dispute, but it sounds like Spyglass came to her this time around with a much stronger offer. With Campbell back on board and Williamson in the director's chair, Scream fans will likely be lured back into the saga despite the black cloud hanging over the proceedings after Barrera's unjust firing. Oh, okay. So, pretty excited for this. I've done a whole show before on the Scream series. Of course I have, very famous series in horror. And it's a series that I enjoyed the first couple of growing up, but then kind of my interest kind of waned subsequently in later years. My horror tastes changed, later on, growing up. I guess when I started seeing Scream and Scream was big, or I was able to watch Scream 2 was the first Scream that I saw. It's fairly tame in comparison to other films from, let's say, the 80s and earlier 90s or 70s, whatever. So my taste, kind of as I was going through my horror fandom, went into, I want to see gorier things or more full-on things. And, you either continue down that road or your tastes change as you grow up and whatnot. But I've grown an appreciation for the original Scream films. I think the third one isn't really as bad as I remember, although Roman is a shite killer. And it's a bit cheesy. The finale of the film isn't that good, but it's not terrible in other parts. But we talked when we did the Scream show about Scream 6. Scream 5 was fine, but I thought the killer reveals were kind of cheesy. But that's kind of become by the by, I think, with later Scream films. But Scream 6 I generally quite enjoyed. And I did feel that it wasn't a big deal not having Neve Campbell there, which seems kind of crazy. She is front and centre of the Scream films, but it just felt like she was a bit shoehorned into Scream 5. Felt like her character had got a happy ending, and happy endings for protagonists in long-running series are so rare. I just kind of felt, okay, she's come back. She's barely survived because people can get stabbed multiple times, and it just doesn't seem to do much. Let her ride off and have her sunset. Scream 6, I think it was really good to focus on the core four, or I think it's the core four they call themselves. Keep them front and center. And I think Courtney Cox's role was also better than it had been in a few films in Scream 6. I generally enjoyed Scream 6 quite a lot. So this is interesting. We had a lot of the controversy going on with Melissa Barrera being fired. That's kind of messed up, really. And Jenna Ortega, I feel, unless she was going to become the main star, then I would have just assumed her getting killed off. I mean, there is a moment in Scream 6 she gets stabbed in the spine, or it looks like the spine, and there's no effect. Yeah, the knives look massive, and she's a small person. I kind of assumed that because of her getting bigger, she may be written out early on, or become the main front and center star. But yeah, she's just exited the project. I think scheduling conflicts, or solidarity with Melissa Barrera. There's also been comments that some of the other actors just haven't even been contacted yet about the next Scream film, which is kind of shit, but I guess it really depends on where they're going with the story, because there isn't necessarily, if we are going to go down the route of Neve Campbell is back as the lead, and you'd have to assume Courtney Cox will be back. I don't really know if she's doing much else. You could focus the attention on wherever Sydney is living. You don't necessarily need to then follow on with the core four. I mean, it would make sense developing a new story and whatnot, and we are in the age of not even really just franchises now, but universes, building up these massive things where things going on, different areas, different towns, cities, countries that then all come together in the big event. So there isn't necessarily a reason why we can't have a film that just focuses on Neve Campbell and her new group of friends, co-workers and whatnot, and shoehorning Gail there somewhere, without referring to what's gone on with Sam Carpenter and Tara? I can't remember the characters' names. I'm terrible. Yeah, interesting. But I understand she dropped out of Scream 6 because the salary on offer wasn't good enough. But I get that. Obviously, know your worth, and if you're being offered a shit salary and it's a kick in the teeth. I mean, same thing happened with Danielle Harris for Halloween 6. They were offering her a shite salary, and she said, well, no, I should, there's a lot of things going on with that. In the end, they recast her, and it was a bad decision anyway. But yeah, there we go. Scream 7 has its star back. Fran in the chat says, so they're just going to claim the youngsters just post Scream 6 due to their injuries. They're going to claim the youngsters died post Scream 6 due to their injuries. I don't know. I mean, the brother of the twins gets stabbed a lot, and I remember thoroughly enjoying Scream 6. But when he was shown, I guess it was kind of similar to Dewey, but it was a lot more extreme, like Dewey in Scream 2, I want to say. But when he was shown to be alive and generally fine on the gurney at the end of Scream 6, I was like, that would have been a cool death scene. I get it's a bit of a fake out, but I mean, how many times can the human body be stabbed and it's not fatal? Like, these aren't little pen knives, like the Scream knives that they always clean and it makes a sound, are pretty big. But it's a film, I digress. It wouldn't be a Ministry of Horror without me talking about fucking Halloween. And I say fucking Halloween, it is my favourite film franchise, for better or worse. But this is news that has to be discussed. It's a few days old now, but I just noticed it and thought we got to include that, even though the news segment is going on bloody long. Halloween. Miramax TV series will be a creative reset for the franchise. So this is John Scribes by Disgusting. We learned this past October that Miramax landed the TV rights to the Halloween franchise, joining forces with Malik Akkad's Trancas International Films to bring Michael Myers to the small screen. Miramax will be developing and co-producing the Halloween saga's first ever TV series, and Miramax head Mark Helbig provides an update to Deadline. What can we expect from the Halloween TV series, you ask? For starters, don't expect any kind of continuation to the storyline from David Gordon Green's Halloween trilogy, which would be pretty difficult considering he got put into a meat grinder or a trash compactor type thing. He got ground to mush. The foundation of it is the original film, the John Carpenter movie, the characters of that film, and perhaps a group of characters that we haven't really focused on that much in recent film versions or even a number of them, Helwig teases. It's a creative reset completely and going back to the original film as opposed to spinning out any of the more recent film adaptations. Helwig also notes we're on a fast track. It's a big priority for us. We've had lots of exciting conversations in recent months with a number of really talented people, and I think we'll have a pretty good idea of what we're going to be doing very soon. We're hoping to lock down the creative team very soon. I don't know. I mean, a Halloween TV series, again, it's something where if just specifically the last film hadn't happened, probably would have been kind of hyped about it. Kills has some merit. It's a bit disappointing compared to 2018. It's got some good kills in it though, but they do make Michael Myers Jason really. It's not. Going back to the foundations of the original film, now, of course, the original film is the best. That's always generally more often than not always the case. But the original film is an all-timer, John Carpenter's film. Do I want to see another retreading of that? No. It's like, I think I saw this analogy on Twitter or X. It's like Spider-Man. It was a good idea when Homecoming came out that we weren't getting another Spider-Man origin story. Because everyone knows the origin story. Why rehash it? And with Halloween, we've had Rob Zombie's Halloween. We've had so many films revert back to the original, ignoring sequels. Now, with the TV series, it's just so difficult to see how this can be good, unfortunately. I mean, they could go down like the Hannibal route of taking the source material and flipping it on its head. But do we potentially do the flipping it on its head where everything is done for the sake of it? Like, let's change Laurie to Lawrence, or you know what I mean? Not to beat around the bush, but let's flip things for the sake of it. Sorry about the dogs. I imagine they've seen a cat outside. I don't know. It gives me that kind of feeling of when the synopsis got released for Halloween Ends, and I can't help but talk about it. But I remember Kills was a little bit disappointing. It was one of those films I had to kind of process. It wasn't like an instant hit with me, and as I processed it, I was like, okay, I really can't give it as high of a score as I want to, because there's some good, but there's also some not so good that you can't really look past. But I remember when the synopsis came out for Ends, and I was just like, this is kind of troubling. Like the story itself sounds kind of bogus. I'm not sure how this can be done well, and in my opinion, it wasn't. Now, we don't have a synopsis here, other than it's a reset back to the originals, a creative reset going back to the original film. Is that meaning that it is readapting the original story? Or is it going back to the events of the first film and doing another timeline reset for our sequel to the first film. If they went that route, is Laurie Michael's sister again? Is the film going to be set in a hospital? You know, just I don't know. Gruff, for fuck's sake, as long as we don't talk about the 2018 film, it's just not needed, is it? Let's be honest. But they're going to do it anyway, so I guess we can only hope it's not total rubbish. Best case scenario, lol. Fran says, can't wait for the scene when Michael fights Jason. They bond over their mothers having the same name. Martha? My mum's name is Martha too. So is mine. Jesus. Right, we will quickly wrap up. We probably don't need to talk about that. Oh, yeah, I guess we can mention that. So, Chucky. First images from Season 3's return in April show a horror icon on his deathbed. USA and Sci-Fi's, again, John Squires, BloodDiscussion.com, USA and Sci-Fi's hit horror series Chucky is coming back to the small screen for Season 3 Part 2 on April 10th. And Sci-Fi brings us a handful of first look images this week. The third season of Chucky was split into 2 parts as a result of last year's Hollywood strikes, in case anyone was wondering why there's a part 2 this year. Season 3 part 1 ended on a bombshell with the reveal that the killer good guy doll is finally aging, and these new images suggest that Chucky's true death may be imminent. Chucky has survived multiple brushes with gruesome death over the years, from a burning to a melting to complete bodily dismemberment, but he always manages to find a way to keep on kicking. That string of luck may be coming to an end this year, however, as Chucky's current predicament is leaving him as vulnerable to natural causes as the rest of us. How will Chucky get himself out of this pickle? Find out beginning April 10th. In Chucky's unending thirst for power, Season 3 finds Chucky ensconced with the most powerful family in the world, America's first family, inside the infamous walls of the White House. How did Chucky wind up here? What in God's name does he want? And how can Jake, Devon and Lexi possibly get to Chucky inside the world's most secure building, all while balancing the pressures of romantic relationships and growing up? The returning cast includes Brad Dourif, Jennifer Tilly and Devon Sawyer, alongside Lara Jean Churetsky, Zachary Arthur, Björgen Vin Arneson and Alvia Allen Lind. John Waters will play Good Guys creator Wendell Wilkins in Season 3 Part 2. Yeah, Chucky is an interesting series. Like, the first series on the whole worked for me. You know, we've talked previously about Chucky. We've had a Chucky episode, I'm sure. And yeah, it's a fun series. It's not one of my favourites, but there's some fun entries. There's some duds, you know. It's a typical horror franchise. TV series came about, and generally series 1 was pretty fun. It had some lull moments. But there's some, I mean, really Brad's performance as Chucky is kind of a key centre point. But I really did appreciate how Don Mancini connected everything together in terms of the film series, all of the film entries, really, except I think the remake, which is fine. But his film series, along with the TV show, and made it in a way that was accessible, so it wasn't a case of, well, you won't get this because you haven't seen the films. Like, the dialogue does enough of a good job to carry things forward, but also if you're a fan of the series, it's got lots of good fan service. Series 2, though, man, I couldn't finish. I just really struggled to get going with that. I found some of the characters have just become kind of whiny and annoying, and so when that happens in a show, I just struggled, man. I struggled to kind of keep up with it. And I've certainly found over the years that if a TV show gets to a point where I'm like 3-4 episodes in a lull, that I struggle. I mean, I never saw it when it originally came out, but Twin Peaks, loved Series 1. Series 2, after the reveal of who killed Laura Palmer, is such a slog, and it took me a few separate sittings with months apart to finish it, because the finale is pretty good to Series 2. The finale is very famous. And there's reasons why it was sucked so much in the middle, but it was such a slog for a period. Walking Dead, we've talked about. Really enjoyed first few seasons, but it got to one particular season where I was just finding myself less and less interested to watch the latest episode. And I got to a point the Sky Planner had about 6 or 7 episodes backlogged, and I was like, I'm all right. I've seen enough at this stage. I don't need to see where they're going to go with it because I don't know when it's going to end. Gruff in the chat. First 3 films are fun, and I'm one of the few that enjoyed the remake. Yeah, the remake I thought was fine. You know, I don't think there's anything bad about the remake. It was decent. It's an interesting tale on it. And yeah, I agree. The first 3 films are fun. And also Bride of Chucky, I quite enjoy. Seed of Chucky, I thought was bad. But Fran, I quite enjoyed the 2 films with Fiona Dorifin. Cult gets weird with the multiple Chuckies, but sets up the TV series. Yeah, that's true. I preferred Cursed Cult, to be honest. But yeah, it does a good job of setting up the TV series. And I do think it was good that those were addressed because those 2 films, I think, were more straight to DVD as opposed to theatrical releases. So it would be very easy to overlook them or even ignore them. But I think it's quite good that they are treated as part of the general canon. And then final bit of news. Ghoulies. The original creators are planning a new trilogy for a new generation. Empire Pictures' lovable cult classic creature feature Ghoulies went on to spawn a 4-movie franchise that ended with 1994's Ghoulies 4. That means we haven't seen or heard from the franchise in almost 30 years, but the original creators are now determined to bring the tiny rubber monsters back to life, and it seems they've reclaimed the rights to be able to do it. Director co-writer Luca Bercovici and producer co-writer Jeffrey Levy have reclaimed the domestic rights to the 1984 cult classic film. The plan, they want to develop a new film trilogy for a new generation. We've been told that 2 of the scripts are already complete, with the 3rd one halfway complete at the time of this article being published. We're shopping it now and hoping to film in late summer, early fall. Writer-producer Theo Lemasters tells Blood Disgusting. The press release explains, drawing upon their unmatched expertise and unwavering passion, Libby Bercovici and Theo Lemasters are set to unveil a new series of projects that will keep audiences wallowing in filthy horror fun for many years to come. The team is expanding the Ghoulies universe beyond the silver screen with a book series that will plunge readers into the darkest depths of the Ghoulies universe. Fans can look forward to bringing home a piece of the Ghoulies universe with an exclusive line of figures, apparel, and collectibles for every devotee of the delightfully demonic Ghoulies. Is there that much of an audience? From we gather, Bercovici and Levy were able to reclaim the rights to the original Ghoulies thanks to the same copyright law termination provision that allowed original Friday the 13th screenwriter Victor Miller to make his way back into the franchise he helped create. Under the Copyright Act of 1976, authors may recapture rights from publishers after waiting a prescribed period, usually 35 years, and sending a notice within a 5-year window. The Ghoulies, they'll always get you in the end. I am sure I've seen the first Ghoulies film. Didn't know there were 4. But if you're a Ghoulies fan, you're getting a new trilogy, book series, and toy line. So aren't you lucky? Anyway, that is it for the horror news this week. That was the news. Oh, 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 oh. Boom. Boom, boom, boom. So, we're now going to our review section. And as discussed, the only film we're reviewing this week is Imaginary. Imaginary is a 2024 American supernatural horror film directed and produced by Jeff Wadlow and written by Wadlow, Greg Earp, and Jason Orumland. It is co-produced by Jason Blum through his Blumhouse Productions banner and Tower of Babel. The film stars DeWanda Wise, Tom Payne, Tegan Burns, Piper Braun, Matthew Sato, Veronica Falcon, and Betty Buckler. It was released in the United States by Lionsgate on March 8th, 2024. So, I'm going to first off God, sorry for knocking the microphone. I'm sure that's really annoying, audio listeners. Podcast listeners, because everyone, if you're listening, you're listening to audio. I will kind of preface this by saying, watch the trailer for Imaginary, and that very much gives you an idea of the type of film it is. Now, you could argue that every trailer gives you a general idea of what type of film it is, and sure. But I think when it comes to horror, you can have trailers that missell you on the type of film that you're going to be watching. Trailers that create a lot of intrigue. You watch the film, and all of that is dispelled in the first 10 minutes. Trailers that undersell the film, or trailers that give you an idea of, okay, standard horror, supernatural horror flair. And that is this. I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing. Apparently this has had generally negative reviews. Apparently a lot of people online think this film is terrible. I don't think that's fair, and I think it really depends on what you're comparing it to. If you're watching this and thinking this is a terrible film just entirely because you've had no enjoyment watching it and whatnot, fair enough. But if you're watching this with a comparison in mind of, this is nowhere near as good as Megan or Five Nights at Freddy's, and that's kind of what it's going to be kind of lumped in with. And I guess you could look at it as that kind of PG-13 Blumhouse. I don't know what rating it got, if it got an R rating or what. Doesn't say on Wikipedia, but it has that kind of feeling of like Five Nights at Freddy's was a horror film, but kids watched it because kids love Five Nights at Freddy's, even though it's aimed at a more mature market because it's horror, it's got bloody violence. It kind of is marketed in that way. And with this, the general setup is an imaginary friend. So we'll do what we usually do. We'll read the first sort of section of the Wikipedia, but without getting too far into it, going too much into spoiler territory. And I'll talk about my thoughts and performances and all that malarkey. So a children's author named Jessica is married to a musician named Max, who has two daughters named Alice and Taylor from his first marriage. Little Alice likes Jessica, but teenager Taylor keeps her at arm's length. Jessica is plagued by nightmares, which include her father Ben and her fictional character Simon the Spider. After the family moves into Jessica's childhood home, Alice discovers a teddy bear in the basement named Chauncey and quickly forms a bond with him. An elderly neighbour named Gloria, who babysat Jessica when she was a child, reunites with her. Gloria shares memories of Jessica's childhood, which she cannot remember. Alice's and Taylor's mentally disturbed biological mother Samantha sneaks into the house to see her daughter and attacks Jessica. When the police arrive to take her away, Taylor confesses to texting her. Jessica puts Alice to bed, with her remarking that she had a similar childhood friend. So, essentially, the setup is kind of quite obvious. You get an idea straight off the bat that this Chauncey has some relevance or some connection to Jessica, because the dreams that she has a dream at the very start of the film, this nightmare, and it gives you an idea of something went south maybe in her past, especially with her dad being there. But I don't think that should sell itself too short, like, because this does have some pretty good performances in it. For a start, the younger kid, Alice, played by Piper Braun, does a very good job. She seems like such a sweet girl who has a connection. She's got a scar on her arm, like I think it's a burn scar. So she's quite a timid and self-contained child. So when she has this teddy bear, which also seems to be the front for her imaginary friend Chauncey, it initially seems like, okay, well, she's coming out of her shell a bit. She's enjoying herself. She's smiling a bit more. Also, yeah, DeWanda Wise as Jessica. She's a good lead in this. You know, you feel for her. She does good performances of showing the the need for acceptance from her stepchildren, trying to be there for them when they're kind of going through a bit of turmoil, along with also her sanity being tested by the pieces starting to come back together of, did she have an imaginary friend when she was younger? Because some of these instances now are a little bit too similar to memories that are resurfacing from her childhood. In terms of horror, it's not full on at all. Couple of little jump scary moments, couple of little movements and shadows to kind of give you an idea of, well, is this actually an imaginary friend that's a demonic being? Is it the sort of, I guess, the Conjuring-esque approach of a demon possessing like an Annabelle type doll scenario? You do get your answers in there, and there's a nice little explanation, although it is one of those things when someone in the real world is able to provide a lot of the answers, and it always reminds me of Prometheus for the first time. First time I watched Prometheus, I thought it was fine, fairly enjoyable. But it's when Idris Elba's pilot character all of a sudden has all of the answers. And I remember seeing it in the cinema and thinking, well, how has he just figured all that out? Because that seems to answer a lot of the questions fairly conveniently. And yeah, there's a character in this who has been doing their own research and has all of this information, which is very helpful and convenient. It does get explained as to how they would know all that because of things going on behind the scenes. But yeah, it's not really bloody violence. There's minimal kind of blood in it. A couple of decent jump scares, a couple of moments of suspense, and there is a fake out near the end that I quite enjoyed, actually. And that part of me did think, oh, it's going to be brave as fuck if the film ends here. Those thoughts weren't necessarily followed through in the actions of the film, but there's a couple of funny moments. I don't think it deserves the critical mauling that it's had. I think I had a good enough time watching it. I wasn't blown away. Didn't think it was especially memorable. Giving it 6 out of 10. I think for me to give it any lower would feel a bit unfair compared to the level of enjoyment I got watching it. It was a date night film with Victoria, and we both, she gets a bit jumpy with some scary films, but we both generally had a good time watching it and thought it was quite inventive in some aspects. It's not breaking any new ground. It's not going to set the world on fire, but yeah, I don't think it was as bad as some reviews have made it out to be. So yeah, 6 out of 10 for Imaginary. So that then takes us on to our featured presentation. So, feature presentation, we are chatting Blumhouse. We're chatting Blumhouse. This isn't going to be an extensive deep dive of every film that they've released, because they've released a ton. But as I said at the top of the show, I've kind of cherry picked a few entries that I think you may not know were Blumhouse releases, or ones that I've not necessarily really talked about on the show before. Or I may have talked about other ones previously, but who knows. Anyway, I kind of figured that it's going to be worth chatting Blumhouse, because today a mainstream horror release is going to be Blumhouse, or if it's a bit more highbrow, potentially A24. But Blumhouse seems to be the current big boy for horror releases. Looking at the chat, Gruff says 6 is a good score for a film you watched and enjoyed enough but not blown away mind. Yeah, exactly. Were there hugely memorable moments? No, but I wouldn't say it was necessarily a forgettable film. It's fine. It's fine. I didn't necessarily think any points of it were particularly bad, but it wasn't hugely exciting. It was a decent popcorn film to put on for an hour and a half in the cinema or at home whenever it gets released. Give it a watch. Have some fun. And Eddie the Beast is back in the chat. So, the first sort of film, and these are sort of in chronological order, but again, not extensive. It's cherry picking. I don't think we've ever talked about Sinister. So, Sinister's 2012 supernatural horror film, directed by Scott Derrickson, written by C. Robert Cargill and Derrickson, shows Ethan Hawke as a struggling true crime writer whose discovery of snuff films depicting gruesome murders in his new house puts his family in danger. I did wonder about talking about Insidious because that's probably one of the slightly earlier than this, but again, we've talked Insidious before. We've never really touched on Sinister, but this is an interesting film to initially talk about because apparently, as per a 2020 study, Sinister has been named the scariest film ever made based on an analysis of viewer heart rates. Now, I enjoy Sinister. I think it is really quite creepy. It's a good story. It's got a great start to finish. The fact it was made for 3 million and it's made 87 million is incredible. But really, that's something that is quite telling about Blumhouse. In that they've really got such a good business model in terms of incredibly profitable horror films. If I just quickly look, I mean, obviously not all of their films are profitable, but where's the list of releases? But I mean, like Insidious, for example, it's grossed over 100 million worldwide on a 1.5 million budget. For some reason, I thought they did the Conjuring films, but I don't actually think they did. So I don't know who did the Conjuring. No, apparently I got that one wrong. Anyway, so Sinister. Do I think it's the scariest film ever made? No, but it is an enjoyable horror. The sequel I thought was shit, personally. I wanted to enjoy the sequel, but early review scores for it were poor, and when I watched it, it was just such a poor follow-up. But this, for me, was my first viewing of Ethan Hawke in a horror film. He's done a few since then, but this is the first time I've seen him do a horror. It's about a true crime writer, Ellison Oswalt, moving into a home in the fictional town of Chatford, Pennsylvania, with his wife Tracy and their 12-year-old son Trevor, and the 7-year-old daughter Ashley. Unbeknownst to his wife and children, Ellison has moved them into the home where the Stevenson family were killed by hanging. He intends to write a biography about the case to regain the fame he lost after his best-selling book Kentucky Blood was followed by 2 less successful works. He hopes to learn the fate of 10-year-old Stephanie Stevenson, who disappeared following the murders. So, like I say, the story for this is really quite unique. It's something I hadn't really kind of seen before. It balances that line of film containing snuff films, which there's always like a real sort of general true life fear when it comes to snuff films, because you're watching a horror film, a fictional film, wherein the characters are seeing footage of films, but true, and that kind of terror that comes to, collected to that. There's always been that kind of, I mean, for me, that's one of those things where it's like, if this was real life, I in no way would want to see something like that. I mean, I remember growing up at school, you'd get people going, "Oh, have you seen this, like, beheading video? Have you seen this cartel video online?" It's like, no, no, thank you. I've literally zero interest in ever seeing anything like that. I like horror films because they're not real, because they are fictional. I do not want to see that sort of thing. And in this instance is discovering these videotapes which are showing that, and they're uncovering a bit of a mystery. And in amongst that, you have those kind of hidden in plain sight images of Bagul. Now, the whole story there is great, but I feel that the more you see of Bagul, the less effective it is, because Bagul does look quite a lot like Jim. Is it Jim Root from Slipknot? It does have a very similar sort of appearance to that, but generally it's a decent little entry, and scariest film ever made, no, but it's a great release from Blumhouse. The next one that I've selected was a surprise to me as a Blumhouse release. I've only seen it the once. We've talked about it briefly on the show a little while ago, but Lords of Salem from 2012. That was produced by Jason Blum and Oren Peli, and I Am Global was the production company. Well, this was in the list of Blumhouse releases, but now looking at it, I can't see where Blumhouse is related other than Jason Blum being a producer. But it's a 2012 supernatural horror film written, produced, and directed by Rob Zombie. It stars Sherry Moon Zombie, Bruce Davison, Jeff Daniel Phillips, and many others. I guess this would be Rob Zombie's A24-esque film, because it's one of his most unique, and I do feel it is quite an underappreciated film. It's one where I probably should give it a rewatch at some point, because the first and only time I watched it, I had that mixture of feeling, what the fuck is going on, in line with, well, this is pretty intense. This is pretty unique visually. I didn't necessarily say that I would enjoy it in the same line as when I have those feelings watching a David Lynch release. But at the same point, I don't necessarily understand fully what happened in the film, but it was more of an experience. He dialed back, Rob dialed back on effing and jeffing every other word. I feel that there's not that much dialogue in this film. It may well be a case of when there is dialogue, all of it is C-bombs and effing and jeffing. And I'm no prude, but it loses all impact if every other word is an effing and a jeffing. Said before, Rob Zombie, direct films, don't necessarily write them or have someone help with dialogue. Yeah. Again, I don't necessarily remember too much about this. There's a moment, and I've tried to look for the clip online because I thought I don't really necessarily want to watch the whole film from start to finish, but I'm sure there's a moment where Jeff Daniel Phillips' character gets killed, and it's these witches surround him. I think they just bash his head in with something, and it's done in a really disturbing way that wasn't gratuitous but was still quite unnerving. Matthias tries to tell Heidi the truth about the Lords and her lineage. Instead, Lacey and her sisters kill him. Yeah, I remember a moment in that being quite dark and disturbing. But yeah, I haven't ever felt like rewatching the film because Sherry Moon Zombie isn't a great actress. And I think by this point in the releases, it kind of, I think a lot of fans had started getting to the point of, I get it, Rob, you have your actors and actresses that you like to work with, and that's fine, but it's potentially one part of making the work stale. And also, Sherry is not an amazing actress. She can be decent. I think she was pretty decent in House of a Thousand Corpses and The Devil's Rejects. But is she strong as a lead? No. And I think that's where things have started to fall. The wheels have started to fall off a bit because of this insistence that she stars in his films. And obviously, the latest film that he did was The Monsters, which was fucking terrible. But yeah. Let's have a quick look at the chat. Eddie says, "Oh yes, Rob Zombie." Fran, drink every time there's an F-bomb. I think everyone would be paralytic by the end of the film. Gruff, Zombie's dialogue in general is just dirty and grimy. Yeah, I mean, there's the famous bit in his first Halloween film. I'll crawl over there and skull fuck you, or something like that. Is the line that the step uncle says or stepfather says. It's just gross. Makes you feel dirty, Gruff says. And Eddie the Beast says, definitely Korean zombies. That gives me the shivers. Yeah, so this to me was quite interesting to see that it was a Blumhouse production, or at least Jason Blum production. But it's an interesting Rob Zombie film. And I think if you've seen some Rob Zombie and maybe haven't made your mind up on him yet, or you have made your mind up on him but you haven't seen this film, I do think it is worth a watch. It's certainly better than some of his other films, but it's his most unique film, I think. The next one that I've selected to touch on is the start of a franchise, the start of the many franchises that have appeared under Blumhouse, and that is The Purge. I'm talking about the first film here. James DeMonaco, yes, wrote and directed. 2013 American dystopian action horror film written and directed by James DeMonaco. The film stars Ethan Hawke, Lena Headey, Adelaide Kane and Max Burkholder as members of a wealthy family who find themselves endangered by a gang of murderers during the annual Purge, a night during which all crime, including murder, is temporarily legal. Purge premiered at the Stanley Film Festival on May 7th, 2013. Universal Pictures theatrically released it in June 7th, 2013. It's grossed $91 million against a $3 million budget. So I've still not fully seen all the Purge films. I've only recently seen the first Purge. I haven't seen the Forever Purge or the TV series yet. But the interesting thing with The Purge is that when this film came out, the quality I felt of the first film, and the cast as well relating to it, the story or the execution, I'm not sure. The execution was fine, but the story itself, the set of the first film, created promise for a franchise as opposed to being a strong entry in a franchise. The original Purge is fine, but for me, when I watched it, I was like, okay, well, the film is decent, but the setting is more interesting. This idea that to eliminate or reduce crime in areas by making one night of the year an annual Purge was really quite interesting and unique. And it doesn't just have this idea of, all hoodlums and gangsters will just run riot and go around causing all sorts of mayhem. But then you've got the elite who then revel in sadism and murder for their kicks. You've got all of these different elements going on in this world. But in the first film, it's more of a under siege sort of setup. It's set essentially around this house. And I have to admit, the second film especially does such a good job of taking that setup and going, well, actually, the world out there is so much more interesting than what's going on in this house. I feel that if the first film had been set up partly in the house, and then due to circumstances they have to go out to the wider world to get help or to survive the night, it would have been more enjoyable. Instead, The Purge kind of felt like The Strangers, but with an interesting dystopian setup, as opposed to, why are you doing this? Because you're home, that sort of thing. Which The Strangers, I've not seen the trailer for the new one, but I've not heard good things. Fran the Canon, I prefer Anarchy Election Year over the original. I think it's because this one's very contained. Yeah, exactly. The world setup is really unique to anything else that's been kind of coming out at that sort of time. But by containing that just into a house and surviving the night in the house, felt like a bit of a misstep. And Election Year is pretty good as well. I think Anarchy is probably my favourite of what I've seen. The Forever Purge I've not seen yet, but the first Purge I thought was fine. Not really as good as Anarchy or Election Year, I felt. But again, it's another low budget. Well, I say low budget. It doesn't. The thing with the Blumhouse films, they don't look low budget in comparison to other films. They're able to make these incredibly well put together horror films for budgets that you then compare to comedy films of the same sort of time, which probably haven't had to spend much on effects packages. Maybe the money's gone purely on actor salaries, but you get comedy films that came out at the same sort of time with budgets of 60 million, 80 million, in comparison to a horror film that looks more polished, made for 1.5 million. It's a little bit baffling. Eddie the Beast, it's always first films which aren't as good as the second one. Oh, I would honestly say that that's quite rare, to be honest. I think more often than not, in my opinion, and obviously this is all opinion, and opinions are all welcome here, usually the first film, more often than not, is the best, and then sequels are trying to remake them or reevaluate that. And the exceptions to the rules for me, anyway, are Godfather Part 2, Terminator 2. I would say Aliens. I prefer Aliens to Alien. But usually, I mean, if I was to compare Halloween and Halloween 2, then Halloween all day long is my winner. But yeah, with The Purge, I just kind of... I just felt like you got a good setup, but the execution of the story wasn't quite what I'd have wanted. Fortunately, though, we did get sequels and they were very well done. Now, next up, I think this may have been my introduction to Mike Flanagan. And that is Oculus. 2013 supernatural psychological horror film, co-written, edited and directed by Mike Flanagan, based on his short film Oculus Chapter 3, The Man with the Plan, and stars Karen Gillan and Brenton Thwaites as two young adult siblings who are convinced that an antique mirror is responsible for the death and misfortune that their family had suffered. So this is a film that had a $5 million budget. Box office only 44, which I feel didn't really necessarily find its audience at the time of release. But the film takes place in two different times, the present and 11 years earlier. Two plot lines are told in parallel through flashbacks. In 2002, software engineer Alan Russell moves into a new house with his wife Marie, 10-year-old son Tim, and 12-year-old daughter Kaylee. Alan purchased an antique mirror to decorate his office. Unbeknownst to them, the mirror supernaturally induces hallucinations. Marie is haunted by visions of her own body decaying, while Alan is seduced by a mysterious and ghostly woman named Marisol Chavez, who has mirrors in place of eyes. We then jump back and forth between 2013 and 2002. This is... Around the can in the chat, Halloween all day long. Don't think I've seen that sequel. God, no. This, I guess, is a good introduction to Mike Flanagan and gives you an idea of his style in terms of like the ghostly images of characters he kind of almost perfected later on with The Haunting of Hill House. Or A Haunting at Hill House, whatever the full title is. or Haunting at Bly Manor, which I think is fine. It's just not. It wasn't quite as good as Hill House. But it gives you a really good introduction to his tone of filmmaking. I think Hush came out prior to this, and Hush is a very good thriller. But Oculus is a horror that a lot of people slept on and didn't really get around to watching. Karen Gillan has a great performance in this. Brenton Thwaites, I can't really remember who that is. Katie Sackhoff, I think, played the mother in the flashbacks. Rory Cochrane, I think, was the father. It's been a little while since I've seen this, but I don't really think you can go too far wrong with Mike Flanagan. He is a director that I'm intrigued and I enjoy his output. I need a little something different from him, where he's been focusing on TV, and I found that's becoming a bit of mixed results. Like, I've really struggled with the Midnight Club. I think it's generally been decent. It's very well made, but nothing has hooked me to watch the next episode, and it's been a real slog going through each of the episodes, just in terms of nothing's got its hooks into me. And I've not got around to really starting. I think I've started the first episode, but not finished it, of The Fall of the House of Usher. I've heard good things about it, but it just hasn't sucked me in to watch it all. But I do believe in Mike Flanagan. I think Dr. Sleep was pretty darn good, considering the book isn't amazing, and I'm a big Stephen King fan. The Dr. Sleep book is fine. It's not great. But it's definitely one worth watching. Gruff in the chat, never seen Oculus, will add it to my list. Definitely worth checking out. And the finale of it was pretty good. Yeah, I think it's worth a watch. Oh, show. Now, when going through the list of films, this one, the artwork stood out to me because I remember watching this and thinking it was fucking terrible. So I didn't realize this was a Blumhouse release, but I have seen it. No idea on what the box office return was. I feel it may have been a straight to DVD because Wikipedia isn't offering up that information to me. But it's the same director who did The Strangers, The Monster, which I think we watched on stream. And is that the one we watched on stream? John Martinez at Father House. Yeah. There we go. Right, okay. Yeah, we did watch The Monster, and it was actually quite good. And The Dark and the Wicked, I've heard, is good. I've just never got around to watching. But Mockingbird, I did think was kind of crap. Imagine seeing that in the corner of your room. God, yeah, it's a bit creepy. The kind of the clown face in the style of the art makeup for, it's kind of a mixture of Captain Spaulding and John Wayne Gacy. Not nice. But it is a found footage horror from 2014, written and directed by Brian Bottino, from a story by Bottino and Sam Esmail. The film was released as VOD on October 7th, 2017, and was given a DVD and Blu-ray release on October 24th. It stars Todd Stashwick, Alexandra Lydon, and Barrick Hardley as three people that have been given video cameras with the instructions to film their daily activities for a strange contest. Sorry, I heard sounds from downstairs, and I don't think my girlfriend's home yet. Which usually means that the poochies have gotten into the bins or something. I may take off one earphone just in case I have to suddenly run away downstairs. Oh, well. I'll probably take both earphones off because there's no music playing. But anyway. So the film follows three groups of people, all of whom have found a video camera on their doorstep and begin filming under the impression that this is a key to winning the money from a mysterious competition. Tom is an average guy filming the life of his family with his wife Emmy. Beth is a bored and isolated college girl who sees the camera as something to fill her free time. Leonard is a mother's boy who believes his clown makeup will steal the scene. Each group has been given a label: the family, the woman, and the clown, but they are largely unaware of what is truly going on and are shocked when they receive instructions telling them to keep filming or die. Eddie in the chat. Oh, I know that feeling. My dog is a shitbag. Fortunately, we have a camera downstairs. So I'm going to keep chatting because this is recording. This is going out on podcast platforms. But I am home alone. And I can hear lots of mooching about. And I don't know. Well, I can see Pippin on the camera, circling in his bed to go in his bed. I can't see Bailey though. And apparently the kitchen camera is offline. I know this is not entertaining podcasting, but when the dogs are making sounds, I get a bit nervous. Got access to one camera, and we can't see. Okay, right, well. 2 of the 3 dogs are asleep. Bailey the troublemaker. Oh, you don't know the half of it, mate. Hide the rugs. Oh, God. Yeah, we've had some incidences recently, and Bailey's in the process of getting booked into, finally, well overdue, getting the snip. Should have probably had the snip many years ago with his original owners. For whatever reason, they didn't do it. But yeah, certain things have fast forward that process, unfortunately. Unfortunately for my wallet, but health-wise it's good to do. Anyway, Mockingbird. Very forgettable film, and I've only really included it because I didn't realise it was a Blumhouse release. Speaking of forgettable, unfortunately, they also released Ouija, 2014 supernatural horror film directed by Styles White. In his directorial debut, produced by Jason Blum, Michael Bay, Andrew Form, Bradley Fuller, and Bennett Schneier, and written by Juliet Snowden and White, who previously wrote The Possession. Have I seen The Possession? Don't know. Might have done, actually. Sam Raimi production. Yeah, it was fine. But yeah, Ouija stars Olivia Cook, Darren Kagasav, Douglas Smith, and Bianca A. Santos as teenagers who have unleashed spirits from a Ouija board. It was released by Universal Pictures. Commercial success, grossing $103.6 million against a budget of $5 to $8 million, but was overwhelmingly panned by critics, with many criticising its performances, inconsistent tone, characters, and story. This is one of those instances talking earlier on about. Also Eddie's mentioned in the chat, hide the socks. Yeah, funnily enough, whenever we have clothes drying on rails downstairs, more often than not, we notice 1 or 2 socks missing. Bastards. This is another one of those films where I think the original is quite poor. It's interesting enough setup, it's not entirely original, but it's one of those concepts where it's like, has there been a film purely about that board, or has that board been used as a basis to set up a number of films? Where the follow-up, although it's a prequel, is much better than the original. This was a entirely forgettable cookie-cutter horror. It just had that generic tone of over-reliance on cheesy jump scares with poor CGI without creating much tension. And so, from memory, the jump scares come thick and fast. And I've got no problem really with a good jump scare. I know some people look at horrors that have jump scares as low-hanging fruit, and I understand that. But for me, if I'm watching a horror film and it has moments that make me jump, it's elicited a response. And I'm fine with that. I'm more than happy to watch a film and have a few jump scares in it. But when it has an over-reliance on just going quiet, 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 boom! Quiet, quiet, quiet. Oh, camera pans around. They've looked in the mirror. They've looked away. They've looked back in the mirror. Someone's behind them. Boom! It's just, it's cheesy. It's derivative. There's no substance there. And as Francis in the chat, Ouija Origin of Evil was much better too. Yeah, and that was directed by the guy who did Lights Out, who's David, whatever his name is. Can never remember his name. It was directed and edited by Mike Flanagan. Well, there you go. I always thought it was the guy who did Lights Out who did the Ouija sequel, but actually no. The guy that directed Lights Out did the prequel to Annabelle, which starred the same girl as the Ouija Origin of Evil. God, very confusing. But yeah, Mike Flanagan. So there you go. Eddie the Beast. How many people actually go on YouTube and do stupid Ouija board games? There's some videos of people playing with Ouija boards. More often than not, it's incredibly obvious when they are faked. And you could even argue all of them are faked, right? I went to a ghost hunt with my sister for her birthday many years ago. And it was like a professionally run one, professionally, at this sort of like manor house. And there's a few moments where me being an open-minded skeptic, where a few moments where I was like, oh, not entirely sure if I can explain that. That's interesting. But at one point we did a Ouija board. And no, it wasn't a Ouija board. It was like just putting your fingers on the glass and move around if there's contact. It was incredibly obvious to me that it was one person in particular that was moving it. You know, I at no point felt that there was a presence moving the glass. You can quite clearly see when someone is putting more pressure on it and pushing it in certain directions. And whether that is because they were part of it, could well be. Whether it's because they just wanted to make it an experience, could well be. Or they could just be full of shit thinking the spirits are running through me and they're, that kind of bullshit. But yeah, Ouija is low-hanging fruit horror. It's there isn't much to it. And kind of rounding out this mini section, which isn't quite complete, of not so good Blumhouse releases, they went into the erotic thriller world and did The Boy Next Door. The Boy Next Door is an erotic thriller directed by Rob Cohen from 2015 and written by Barbara Curry. It stars Jennifer Lopez, Ryan Guzman, Ian Nelson, with John Corbett and Kristen Chenoweth playing supporting roles. It follows a 19-year-old boy, after having a one-night stand with his high school teacher, develops a dangerous and deranged obsession with her. Barbara Curry, a former criminal lawyer, wrote the screenplay for the film inspired from her life's experiences. Now, it was financed and produced by Blumhouse, which was filmed for 23 days in Los Angeles. It had negative reviews from critics who felt it promised campy thrills but did not deliver. But it grossed $53.4 million against a $4 million budget, making it a box office success. Claire Peterson is separated from her husband Garrett, who is cheating on her with his secretary, while her colleague and best friend Vicky Lansing Vicky Lansing urges Claire to divorce him. 19-year-old Noah Sandborn, an orphan whose parents died a year ago, moves in next door to help his uncle, who uses a wheelchair. Noah befriends Kevin, Claire's teenage son, and begins attending his school, where she teaches classics. Noah is partially drawn to Claire by their mutual love for Homer's Iliad. Typically, they end up knocking boots. And yeah, he doesn't take it well when she usurps him. Things rapidly escalate. It ends up it ends up in a kind of like a farmhouse or a barn fight that is absolutely ridiculous. But if you like dumb, ridiculous thrillers that are light on plot, high on sexiness, just and dodgy thrills, is it worth a watch? I don't know. It's a fairly forgettable film. I enjoy a good thriller, but this really screamed to me weeknight on Channel 5 thriller. And I say Channel 5 because Channel 5 seems to have those like made-for-TV thriller films where you've got Elizabeth Banks or Eric Roberts in a starring role. There's tons of them on Amazon Prime, actually. There's a whole bunch of these series of films where Eric Roberts plays doctors who are disgraced and move from town to town. Who plays a doctor that's disgraced, moves from town to town. Seducing women and then trying to steal their money, but he's like a stalker, or he becomes obsessed with people and stalks them. Eric Roberts seems to get a lot of work, and I don't know why. But I digress. It's very much of that ilk of dodgy, lusty-filled thrillers that you will catch on TV, most likely on Channel 5. That's the sort of quality you can expect from The Boy Next Door. Now, getting us back on track. The Balco experiment. As the caption at the top says, Office Space meets Battle Royale. If people haven't seen The Balco experiment, it's worth a watch. It's a Greg McLean directed film written by James Gunn, starring John Gallagher Jr., John C. McGinley is in this, Tony Goldwyn, Adria Arjona, Melanie Diaz, Josh Brenner, and Michael Rooker. So it's got some names in there that you may or may not be familiar with. Film follows 80 Americans working abroad for a company named Balco Industries in Colombia. One day after they arrive at work, they are locked inside the building, and a mysterious voice announces that if the employees do not start killing each other, they will be killed themselves. Unfortunately, it only grossed 11 million against a 5 million budget. I don't even know if this got a UK cinema release, but it's one that I caught on Prime, and it is pretty good. It's one of those dark horror thrillers that it may not have that many particularly memorable moments, and that maybe sounds a little bit negative, and it's not meant as a negative. It's one of those films where the setup and the story is pretty good. The action is pretty good. But are there any particular standout moments for me from memory? Not really. But make no mistake, it's one definitely well worth a watch. Mike Milch, an employee of Balco Industries, while driving to work, is stopped by street vendors selling lucky handmade dolls. Barry Norris, also of Balco Industries, arrives at the office building in Colombia to find unfamiliar security guards turning away the local Colombian staff at the gate. New employee Danny Wilkins reports for her first day on the job and is told that a tracking device is implanted in the base of every Balco employee's skull in case something happens to them. Evan Smith, Balco's head security guard, does not know who the new security guards are. Once all the employees show up, a voice on the intercom instructs them to kill 2 of their co-workers, or else there will be consequences. Several staff attempt to flee the building, but steel shutters steal off the walls and doors, locking them all in. They ignore the announcement at first, believing it to be a sick prank, but after the set time ends and the 2 have not been killed, 4 employees die with explosives hidden in their trackers detonate and blow their heads apart. Battle Royale. Mike attempts to remove his track with a box cutter, but gives up when the voice threatens to detonate his tracker explosive unless he stops. Things ramp up massively from that point on. It is intense. It is like a English language Battle Royale in a sense. Obviously, we kind of have that with the Hunger Games, which I've not read the books. I do actually finally have the Battle Royale book to read, but my book to be read list is ridiculously big at the moment. But I've only recently watched the first Hunger Games film. Yeah, it was better than I thought it was going to be, but it's still, pale comparison to Battle Royale. But Belko Experiment it's an entry that I do think is worth people's time, and it is a shame that it did seem to fly under the radar or didn't really necessarily get any sort of widespread release. Eddie in the chat, sorry Tezz and all, but got to go, my eyes aren't keeping awake. See you all next time. All right, take care, Eddie. Catch you later. Gruff in the chat, oh wow, I forgot all about this film. I saw it on a flight to New York years ago. I had no clue about the plot or had even heard of it, but I enjoyed it enough. Yeah, it's one that I keep meaning to give a rewatch at some point. But it's definitely an enjoyable entry. We have two more that I wanted to go through. Upgrade. So this is another film that I feel kind of flew under the radar. Didn't really get the full support of the studio behind it. But Upgrade's a 2018 cyberpunk action film, written and directed by Lee Wannell, starring Logan Marshall Green, Betty Gabriel, and Harrison Gilbertson. It follows a technophobe who is implanted with a chip that allows him to control his body after a mugging left him paralyzed. The film was produced by Jason Blum under his Blumhouse Production banner. It got positive reviews from critics who called it one part The $6 Million Man and one part Death Wish revenge fantasy, and praised its dark humor and action sequences. In 2046, Gray Trace, his name's Gray, an auto mechanic lives with his wife Asha, who works for Cobalt, one of the companies contributing to a human-computer augmentations movement. Gray asks Asha to help him return a refurbished car to his client Aaron Keane, a renowned tech innovator. While visiting his home, Aaron reveals his later creation, a chip called STEM that can manage a human's motor functions. Returning home, Gray and Asha's self-driving car malfunctions and crashes. 4 men kill Asha and shoot Gray in the neck, severing his spinal cord. Gray returns home months later as a wheelchair-using quadriplegic under the care of his mother, Pamela. Ash's death and the inability of Detective Cortez to identify their attackers causes Gray to sink into depression. After a suicide attempt, he is visited by Aaron, who convinces him to accept a STEM implant. This is an intense little action. It's got some horror elements, with some of the action being pretty brutal. There's a few fight scenes that are, fucked. quite frankly, there's a couple of moments where it's just like, oh my god, that was terrifying. But yeah, generally it's more of an action thriller type film. I call this on Sky TV once. I think maybe my friend Jamie was visiting and we were thinking of films to check out, and the trailer for this looked kind of interesting. I don't know if it would have maybe done better with a different lead actor. Logan Marshall Green, for whatever reason, just doesn't really seem to have lead appeal. The things that I've seen him in has normally been fairly gettable. I don't know. It's not like he's a bad actor. I'm not saying he's a bad actor. But do I feel that he can carry a film? Not really, unfortunately. But I don't know. Maybe with a different lead to attach the name of above the title, it might have done better. It's certainly a well-made film. And the last film I've selected, don't know why I selected this, but going back to the doldrums of Blumhouse, where not every release can be a hit, is The Craft Legacy. Also known as Blumhouse's The Craft Legacy, is a 2020 American supernatural horror film written and directed by Zoe Lister-Jones, a legacy sequel to The Craft. The film stars Kaylee Spaney, Gideon Aldland, Lovey Simone, and Zoe Luna as 4 teenage girls who practice witchcraft as a coven. Additional cast includes Nicholas Galitzine, Michelle Monaghan, and David Duchovny, with Fairuza Balk making a cameo appearance. Craft Legacy was released in the United States with VOD on October 28th, 2020 by Sony Pictures, releasing under its Columbia Pictures label, with a theatrical release in select international markets beginning the same day. The film has grossed over $2.3 million worldwide and received mixed reviews from critics. Yeah, 18 million budget, 2.3 million box office return. This is not profitable, as is quite evident. Now, The Craft is a classic teen horror film from the mid-90s. It came out during that era of we had like Scream. I know we did last summer. A little bit later on was like The Faculty. There was a really kind of golden period of the 90s for these teen-based thriller horror films where it wasn't about gratuitous gore. You had good music of the time, which a lot of that music still sounds pretty good now. But there's like kind of I don't really know how to word it. Iconic performances, or just there was just something about some of those films that made them kind of just stand out from, let's say, releases from like the mid 2000s. Now, it could just be because of the period that we grew up in. I imagine people growing up being the age that I was in the 90s, my formative years, like being a kid, you would have maybe that same affiliation with those films getting released then. But The Craft is one of those films that never had, for the longest time, a sequel. For whatever reason. Doesn't necessarily mean that every film has to have a sequel. I mean, talking about films from that era, Idle Hands, great film, never had a sequel to my knowledge. But we also in the 90s got a lot of straight-to-video sequels like The Rage Carry 2, which is kind of an unnecessary sequel. And I guess you could say The Craft Legacy was an unnecessary sequel. Three girls, Frankie, Tabby and Lords, are trying to freeze time with magic, but failing as they require a fourth member. Lily Sheshner moves into the town with her therapist mother, Helen, to live with Helen's new boyfriend, Adam Harrison, and his three sons, Jacob, Isaiah and Abe. The girls befriend Lily after she begins her period and bleeds through in class, then is mocked by her other classmates, particularly by the school bully Timmy Andrews. They are amazed when she telekinetically pushes Timmy into the lockers. When Lily responds to them using only her mind, the girls confirm her to be their fourth member and invite her to join their coven, to which she agrees. As a result, they succeed in freezing time. It's just a very unnecessary film. There's the story is just kind of dumb, whereas the story in the original Craft had these girls who were all kind of misfits of varying degrees coming together and finding power through magic, and then to different extents being corrupted by that magic, and whilst it initially gives them power, then it sort of turns, it does that fable very, very well. This is kind of just drivel, and the finale of it was kind of shitty, to be honest. And it's just really... I remember the finale with David Duchovny's character's reveal. It was just like, wait, what? It felt so tacked on. I mean, I guess it was good seeing for Fairuza Balk back, because we haven't really seen her in too much in later years, and she was a real sort of figurehead for those like 90s films. She was in Return to Oz, which is quite a creepy Disney film. And she had a few performances. American History X, I'm sure she was in that as well. She's a good actress that kind of just fell off the face of acting, whether that's through having a family, I don't know. Let's have a quick look at what's going on in the chat. So, Franz Cannon says this film did not need to be made. The Gruff, not seen the original Craft movie or this one. Well, you don't need to see Craft Legacy, Gruff, I can tell you that now. But I agree with Fran, recommend the original. Is adding it to the list. Who could forget The Offspring on the opening of The Faculty? Good times. Fran says the cast in The Faculty is so good. Gruff, I've not rewatched it for a very long time, but I get your point. Salma Hayek was hot. Yeah, The Faculty is great. I think I bought it on Prime, on the Prime store for like 99p at one point. It's great, and I remember with the soundtrack, there's the band is called like the Class of '99, and it's like a super group performing another Brick in the Wall Part 2. But you had like Tom Morello from Rage Against the Machine, Lane Staley from Alice in Chains on vocals. I can't remember who else was in the band, but another example of great 90s films with soundtracks. Great cast in The Faculty. CGI at the very end is part of the time, you know. The only thing with 90s horrors is there started to become a bit of a reliance in some of them on CGI because that was available. Just wasn't necessarily always very good. But if you can get past bad CGI, I mean, I only recently watched Deep Rising for the first time. I'd never seen that. That's pretty good, actually. That's a pretty good action horror. But anyway, we're not talking about 90s decent action horrors. We're talking about 2020's The Craft Legacy. Kind of crap. Wouldn't recommend it. But I hope you've enjoyed this little divergence chat on some of the various degrees of quality of Blumhouse releases over the years. As I mentioned at the top of the show, while I bring in some music, I'll just adjust the volume of said music. Next week, I'm very fortunate to be able to go to see... Fran... I'm not going to see Fran, sorry. Just Fran in the chat. A very underseen or underappreciated film that I've wanted to rewatch for a long time, but it's never available on streaming. Fran asks, have you seen Disturbing Behaviour? So Disturbing Behaviour is, again, it's a very good example of that mid to late 90s teen thriller horror. It's kind of like Invasion of the Body Snatchers, but I'm sure that they're robots or something in there. Maybe, I don't know about robots, but Disturbing Behaviour is like a kind of like how The Faculty was Invasion of the Body Snatchers for a teen audience. Disturbing Behaviour was kind of like a version of that, but it was as opposed to aliens, I'm sure it was like robots or there's some sort of conspiracy. It starred James Marston, not James Masters, who was Spike, but James Marston, I want to say, and there was another guy in it who's in a lot of 90s things, and Katie Holmes was in it. Yeah, Disturbing Behaviour is well worth a watch. Is that available on Prime? Because if it is, then we will watch that tonight. But something tells me it's not. Disturbing... I know it was on... I'm sure it was on Disney Plus at one point. It's available... Oh, okay. It's available to rent for £2.49 or buy on Blu-ray for 20 quid. Oh, 20 quid's a bit rich for that film. But... I'd be tempted to rent it at some point for £2. Oh. When you click on it, it says £3.49. Bit cheeky. Anyway. But there we go, Fran in the chat. I have on DVD. It's kind of a teenage take on Stepford Wives. Right, Stepford Wives is a bit more appropriate than Invasion of the Body Snatchers. But they kind of, I guess, have a similar sort of take of... you know, people being either replaced or rewired in a certain way. But anyway, that is it for another edition of Ministry of Horror. Next week I will be getting to watch Late Night with the Devil, and I will be doing some sort of vlog or video on socials. Follow me at Tezz Elliott on Instagram. I think it's TEZZELLIOTT. If you use X or Twitter, it's ministry_horror. Give us a follow. I will try and post on there a bit more. And if you aren't watching, or if you are watching on Twitch, it's twitch.tv/Tezzius, TEZZIUS. Give us a follow. If you want, give us a subscribe. Much appreciated. And if you're listening on podcast platforms, please give us a review, click follow, or whatever, add show, whatever. Give the show a listen, tell your friends, it's all good. If you're watching live, stick around. We're going to do a watch party, otherwise I will catch you later.